I noticed the time first, 2:38 a.m. It was the fourth night in a row I'd opened my eyes to that exact minute, and the part of me that still believed in coincidences finally went quiet. At the time, nothing in my life felt unusual enough to justify it. I lived alone in a rented duplex outside Des Moines, Iowa, one of those quiet developments where every house looked like a variation of the same idea. Beige siding, narrow driveways, small fenced yards. I worked remote compliance review for a healthcare contractor based in Arizona, which meant my schedule ran late. Most nights I didn't log off until after midnight. That was my routine. Finish work, heat something frozen, sit on the couch with the lights low, then go to bed around 1:30. Nothing dramatic. No alcohol. No background TV noise. Just silence and sleep. Until the waking started. The first night, I assumed stress. The second, I blamed my sleep cycle. By the fourth, I lay still in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe, and felt a low unease settle behind my ribs, because waking up wasn't the only thing that was happening. Every night at 2:38, the house changed, not in a way I could immediately explain. No loud noises, no sudden movements, just a subtle shift, like a pressure drop before a storm. The air felt heavier. The silence became sharper, more defined, as if it were listening back. I didn't feel panic, not at first, just awareness. The duplex was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, open living room and kitchen, built in the early 2000s, no basement, no attic access. I'd lived there almost 3 years without incident. I knew its sounds, the faint tick of cooling pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on the road behind the yard. At 2:38, those sounds disappeared, not stopped exactly, more like they retreated, as if something else had taken priority. The fifth night, I sat up in bed and checked my phone the moment I woke. 2:38 a.m. I stayed still, holding my breath, trying to catch whatever had pulled me out of sleep. That's when I realized I wasn't alone in being awake. The house was alert. That sounds ridiculous written out. I know that. But there's a difference between a quiet space and a waiting one. And at 2:38, the rooms felt occupied by expectation. I swung my legs out of bed and stood there, listening. The hallway was dark. The door to the spare bedroom was closed, just as I'd left it. The bathroom light was off. Everything looked normal. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't scared yet, just curious. The clock on the microwave read to 41. When I returned to bed, sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying the moment I'd woken up, trying to pinpoint the trigger. A sound, a thought, a dream I couldn't remember. Nothing fit. The next night, I set an alarm for 2:35, just to see if waking up early would change anything. It didn't. I lay there awake, watching the minutes crawl forward, my eyes fixed on the digital clock. When it flipped to 2:38, the air changed anyway. It felt like standing too close to someone you couldn't see. That was the night I noticed the smell. Faint, metallic, like cold air after rain, even though it hadn't rained in days. It lingered for less than a minute, then faded, leaving the room feeling stale and closed in. I didn't sleep again until morning. Over the next week, the pattern solidified. Every night, 2:38 a.m. If I stayed up late, it happened wherever I was in the house. If I went to bed early, it pulled me out of sleep. If I tried to distract myself, music, podcasts, white noise, it still came through. Not as a sound, but as a presence that drowned everything else out. I started writing things down, partly to stay grounded. 2:38, woke up suddenly. House felt full. No noise. Smell again. Hard to describe. Silence to clean. I told myself it was anxiety manifesting physically. That remote work and isolation had finally caught up with me. That the human brain is excellent at inventing patterns when left alone too long. Then the lights started responding, not turning on or off. Nothing that obvious. but dimming slightly, as if someone had adjusted a switch somewhere else in the house. The living room lamp would grow just a shade warmer, then return to normal. The kitchen overhead would hum a fraction louder, then settle. Always at 2:38. I called my sister one afternoon and mentioned it casually. The way you talk about a bad dream you don't want to sound dramatic about. She laughed and suggested I see a doctor. Sleep disorders, stress hormones, all that. She wasn't wrong. I even scheduled an appointment. But the earliest opening was 3 weeks out. By then, the house had progressed to the next phase. The sound came first as a vibration, not loud enough to be a noise, more like a sensation felt through the floor. A slow, rhythmic pressure, as if something heavy was shifting its weight just out of sight. It lasted exactly 90 seconds. I timed it. After it stopped, the house exhaled, and the normal background noises crept back in one by one. Refrigerator, pipes, the faint ringing in my ears. I began dreading the clock. My sleep schedule fell apart. I napped during the day, stayed half awake at night. I stopped using the bedroom altogether and slept on the couch, wanting to see more of the space when it happened. The vibration felt closer there. By the 3rd week, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. The house wasn't the source. It was the boundary. Whatever was happening respected the walls, the rooms, the structure. It didn't break rules. It observed them, and it followed time with precision. I bought a cheap audio recorder online and placed it in the living room. If this was in my head, I needed proof. Something external. The first night I reviewed the file, my stomach tightened. At 2:38 a.m., the waveform changed. A low-frequency pattern appeared, steady and deliberate. It wasn't random noise. It wasn't mechanical interference. It had rhythm. Not fast, not slow, patient. I listened to it on repeat until dawn, my mind cycling through explanations that grew thinner with every pass. The next night, the vibration traveled. It started near the front door. I felt it through the soles of my feet, a gentle pressure rising and falling, as if something was standing there, testing the floor. I didn't move. I didn't look. I knew, with a certainty that scared me more than any sudden noise could have, that if I acknowledged it directly, something would change. At 2:40, it stopped. I waited another 10 minutes before breathing normally again. During the day, the house felt wrong now. Too quiet, too obedient. I caught myself standing in doorways, watching rooms as if expecting them to move when I wasn't looking. I started sleeping with the lights on. That didn't help. On the 26th night, the vibration didn't stop. It intensified, spreading through the living room floor, up the legs of the couch, into my chest. My heart kept pace with it, despite my efforts to slow my breathing. And then it reached the hallway. I felt it pause there, just outside the bathroom. The pressure changed, less diffuse, more focused, like something deciding where to place its weight. The smell returned, stronger this time, metal and dust and something faintly organic. I didn't think about running. The idea never crossed my mind. I was locked into stillness, every instinct telling me movement would invite something I wasn't ready to understand. At 2:41, I heard the sound I'd been dreading. Breathing, not mine. It came from the hallway, shallow and controlled, as if whoever or whatever was doing it was careful not to waste energy. It wasn't labored. It wasn't threatening. It was observant. I pressed my lips together and slowed my breath, terrified it would notice the difference. The breathing matched me. In, out. In, out. I don't know how long it went on. Time lost meaning in that space. All I knew was that the house had narrowed its attention to one point, and I was at the center of it. When it finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than before, like a hand resting on my chest long after it had stopped pushing. The next morning, I packed a bag and went to a motel on the edge of town. I slept for 12 hours straight. At 2:38 a.m., nothing happened. The relief was so intense it made me nauseous. I lay there staring at the stained ceiling, convincing myself that distance had broken whatever loop I'd been caught in, that the house itself had been the problem. I checked out 2 days later and returned home in daylight, windows down, music loud. The house looked the same. I walked through every room. Nothing was out of place. No smells. No tension. I laughed out loud, embarrassed by myself. That night, I stayed up until after 3, determined to break the cycle. At 2:38, the living room light dimmed. Just slightly. The vibration followed seconds later, stronger than ever, rippling through the floor like a warning. The realization settled over me then, cold and absolute. It wasn't tied to sleep. It was tied to me. I spent the next week trying everything I could think of. Changing rooms, changing schedules, sleeping elsewhere, staying awake, drinking caffeine, exercising until exhaustion. Nothing changed the time. At 2:38, it arrived. Always patient, always controlled, never rushing. It began exploring, not physically, not in ways I could see, but I felt its attention move through the house, room by room, pausing in places I spent the most time. The couch, the desk, the bed I no longer used. The pressure would linger, then shift, as if memorizing. The night it reached the bathroom, I broke. I felt it press against the door, not touching it, just close enough to make the air vibrate. The breathing returned, slower now, deeper. I whispered without thinking, "Please." The breathing stopped. The vibration ceased instantly, like a switch flipped off. The silence that followed was complete. To complete, I knew then I'd made a mistake. For the next 3 nights, nothing happened at 2:38. I didn't feel relief. I felt dread. Whatever boundary I'd crossed, whatever acknowledgement I'd given, had changed the rules. On the 4th night, it came early. 2:21 a.m. The house tensed around me, the air thickening like humidity before a storm. The vibration was immediate, aggressive, spreading faster than before. The breathing started right beside the couch. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. I understood what it wanted then, not in words but in intention. It wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It was aligning, matching routines, matching presence, learning when and where I existed, preparing to arrive when I expected it. I left the house that night and didn't come back. I moved in with a co-worker temporarily, then into a short-term rental across town. I broke my lease without explanation. I blocked my landlord's number. For a while, things were quiet. Then, 2 months later, in a different house, in a different room, I woke up and checked the time out of habit. 2:37 a.m. I stayed perfectly still. When the clock changed, the air shifted, not as strongly as before. Not yet, but enough to remind me that routines are easy to follow once they're learned. I don't know what happens when it fully catches up. I don't know if it ever stops. I only know that every night now, no matter where I am, I make sure I'm awake before 2:38. Because whatever started happening at that time doesn't like surprises. And it's very good at waiting.